Hi, this is Chris, and I'm going to attempt to do today something I've never done before, and that is to provide you all with a commentary to an album. I've never done this for a Yes album. I don't know if anyone's ever done it for any album. However, I'm going to attempt to do it for Fish Out of Water, which was my solo album, which I made in 1975. And if you can picture yourself around, 1 a.m. in the morning, sitting between the choir stalls in St. Paul's Cathedral, mainly in darkness with a little bit of light on, which was a little spooky. But I'd spent time there singing in the choir on when St. Paul's were on holiday, mainly because of the fact that when Andrew Jackman and I were both young, we had been in the church choir along with his younger brother Gregory, and in northwest London, St Andrew's Church, Kingsbury, and we had met up with Barry Rose, who taught us all to sing as lads. Now we'll come back to this in a minute, but if you can picture that scene. Prior to being there, we had Andrew Jackman and Bill Bruford, drummer of course with Yes and various other bands, King Crimson, etc., and Earthworks. We had recorded the backing track with keyboards and drums and bass in the basement of my house in Virginia Water in Surrey, and we'd done a pretty good job of actually putting together some pretty organized tracks, and prior to that, even Andrew and myself had I'd composed the music, and then he sat down and helped me put it all together, as he was going to be the arranger on the record, and we discussed that we wanted to make basically a pretty orchestral, big sounding album, and Andrew was very keen on doing that. He'd spent a lot of his life training in orchestration, and so it was an exciting project for both of us. So we spent a couple of months doing the writing, and then we moved into the studio. As I said, Bill Bruford showed up. Gregory Jackman, Andrew's younger brother, was the engineer on the album, and Nigel Luby, who was my assistant on the road as well, was assisting in the studio. So anyway, we'd finished recording the backtracks, and one of the first things we wanted to do between Andrew and myself, we had persuaded Barry Rose that he wanted to play on a rock record, even though he'd never done anything like that in his life before, and of course we wanted him to play it on the organ in St Paul's Cathedral, and so he was up for it. So we went in very late one night, and I remember that listening to the foldback from one tape recorder, and Andrew was conducting Barry playing, and Andrew, I remember, was anticipating the music by 2 or maybe even 3 beats while he was conducting Barry, who wasn't wearing headphones. Andrew was, and Andrew had to think about 3 beats ahead, because by the time the organ spoke and it was recorded, it came back much later than the actual physical act of pressing the keys. And so we took it back to the studio, and it turned out very well, and with a bit of fiddling around, we got everything to go in sync. And so here we are with the opening chords to Hold Out Your Hand. Of course, the Rickenbacker bass sound that I'm using on this track, I developed and used on Ritual on side 4 Topographic Oceans, kind of a Jack Brucey fuzzy sound, enter Bill Bruford. Excellent drumming on this track. All of them actually.
With the morning light.
song I originally written from the keyboards, so the chords were developed first. I developed the bass line from the chord structure, and then later the vocals and the melody. I tend to always work like that on solo things. I tend to get the music first and the vocal and lyric afterwards.
For the treasures of the universe are lying at your feet.
Enter the orchestra for the first time, I believe, and Andrew Jackman, as I mentioned previously, had done all the arrangements, and I remember we were recording the whole album, all 5 songs, with the orchestra, and I was amazed as I sat there in the studio and they played everything that was required of them within a 3-hour period, which I thought was remarkable that they could get all the notes right that quickly. But that's the London Symphony Orchestra, and I guess that's what they do every day. But I think even some of them enjoyed it. Back in those days, symphony players weren't all that fond of rock and roll, but some of them did. And the bass solo. Leading into the organ solo by Barry Rose from St. Paul's. As I mentioned previously, getting some of the organ in sync with the track took quite a lot of fiddling around back in the studio to get the timing right. This was in the days before computers and digital recording, so it was quite a job. Some of the echo effects you're hearing on the vocals, back in those days, digital effects had just really been developed, and some of the, I think I had one of the very first Eventide digital delay units and an Eventide phaser. I think those are the only 2 rack-mounted effects we had in those days, but we overused them real well. And Into You by My Side. This is a ballady 3/4 song, which is unusual, sort of a feel for something that I would write, but it came about, and I was particularly attracted to trying to get that Graham Nash kind of vocal melody and sound. I was a big fan of Crosby, Stills and Nash, and so I tried to work on that with this song. That last little drum break you heard, that was me. That was my one contribution to the drumming on the whole album. Phil hadn't played a drum fill, so I added it in later. So I was like looking at some of the people that I'd grown up with as influences and borrowing a bit from here and a bit from there. And now we have the great flute solo from Jimmy Hastings.
And you by my side.
Jimmy Hastings was quite a character. He'd been a session musician for many years and had a lot of anecdotes, and I remember one night when we were overdubbing this solo back in the studio, he told me that he could always beat the breathalyzer DUI test because he had that flute player's capability of breathing in through his nose and breathing out straight away, so that none of the oxygen got tainted by the alcoholic contaminants in his body, and so he was a man who was always comfortable driving home with the future in. Great solo, great player. I remember when we were mixing this, and we had all the faders when we had all the faders up, I realized that we had a bit of a kitchen sink mix here, because we had harmonies, harmonies on the lead vocal, background vocals, orchestra, St. Paul's Cathedral organ, and it was quite a mixing feat, but Gregory Chapman steered us very well through the mix and ended up sounding great. In fact, when I listened to the original vinyl copy of the album, it still sounds great to this day. And here's the big orchestral outro doubling the bass melody, and very successful. I've never done this before, so I don't know if I look stupid on doing it on camera, but we were going to do it all just audio to start with, and then Gerard, my friend, suggested we just film it, so I'm trying to look interesting while I talk and relax. Segue into Silently Falling. Some very nice woodwind. Slightly Stravinsky influenced. On this track, we're joined by Mel Collins on, I think, a tenor saxophone on this track. He's not playing a solo part, but he's playing textural parts in the middle section. Of course, also Patrick Moraz makes an appearance playing Hammond. And also, quite interestingly, on the last section, I think, to my knowledge anyway, he comes up with the first idea of playing a bass part on a mini moon, which this is prior to the Bee Gees or any of those dance records where that became a heavily featured thing over the next few years. And I can honestly say it's the first time I'd ever heard a bass played on a Moog synth, so Patrick was definitely very creative, had some very original ideas. The old Rickenbacker fuzz bass there. More Beach Boys.
Don't believe in miracles, but I do believe in love. Don't advise you to stick to rules, but there ain't no need.
As you may have noticed by now, as I mentioned in the first place, most of the all the songs were piano based in the writing, and there's almost a complete lack of guitar on the whole album. There's a little bit of guitar here, playing a little Rickenbacker 12 string, playing a little textural high part there, and there's also some more guitar on the end of this track. The last section, Silently Falling, where I tried to do my best to imitate Neil Young. Quite successfully. Leading into Patrick Moraz's Hammond solo, which I have to say is one of the best Hammond solos I've heard to this day. And although we did do it in sections to an extent, or take the best from various solos, you know, it wasn't many takes, and there's some brilliant Hammond playing here. Bill Bruford in his jazz style, place where he's very at home. I'll let you listen to Patrick for a minute. Hear the saxophones coming in now in the background. And Bill's really getting into his stride there and delivering a lot of energy, and the solo ends up as a little duel between the Hammond and a little bass solo on the end. Kind of very Hendrix influence. Oh yeah, and that repeat noise you're hearing that sounds a bit like a submarine, that was a happy accident that happened in the studio. That in those days you used a reel or tape for echo repeats, and if you suddenly stopped it, you would get this continuously cascading kind of repeat. To the best of my memory, that's what it was. All I know also is that it took forever to get it in time, and but when we did, it was good. nice trombone here.
Silently circling round.
And also some very nice phasing on the bass here.
Stills the sea, restores the crowd, breathing life to life that could not breathe. Hopefully,
I always liked this section because it had that Beatley quality about it. And once again, Bill Bruford drumming really good. Speeds up a little bit, but in those days we used to just play like that. And here's the aforementioned Patrick Moraz bass synth part playing along with Bill Bruford's bass drum. And first time I'd ever heard that while I decorated with little bass parts and, as I said, my Neil Young type guitar, attacky bits. Like that. And yeah, this is the only significant part of the album with any guitar, which is all the Rickenbacker 12 string. And once again, my Neil Young influence. A nice mixed blend of, drums and violins playing away, and the other electric instruments. And once again, Patrick Moraz decorating with the bass synth. And if you, there was a reverse gong right there, which was, I believe, a cymbal or a gong. I don't think we had a gong. It was probably a slowed down cymbal that was once again put on the echo loop. You may have heard me sing E-O-Ho there, possibly before Sting ever did, but I'm not going to brag about that. Hi, we're back. Just before we start side two, Let me explain a little bit about what was going on that summer of spring and summer of '75. Yes was very, very busy at that time with touring commitments, and I remember, this whole year was busy for myself and the rest of the guys, to the extent where I remember working on this the music for this album, and then going away for 3 weeks and doing a tour somewhere or other, possibly the States. I can't remember exactly right now, and then coming back, and I do another 3 weeks in the studio working on Fish Out of Water, then dropping it again, leaving town, going off on another tour, and then coming back. And so definitely I guess I was getting into the area of finding out how much stamina was required to be in the modern group, and also make a solo album at the same time. Of course, I wasn't the only one doing that. Steve, John, and Alan, and Patrick Moraz were also doing the same thing at the time, and so it was quite a year for juggling events. So I'd the studio where this was recorded, as I mentioned earlier, was in my house, and I built it when I moved there at the end of '72, and it had taken a few years to come together. And in '74, Yes recorded Relayer in the studio, and I didn't have any equipment then. I just finished the shell of the studio and the control room, and had done the decoration and the carpeting, etc. But it was, we had a meeting, and that's where in '74 Yes recorded Relayer with Eddie Offord's on the road equipment, his mixing board and his MCI 24-track tape machine that he'd had specially converted to go on the road and cut into, and sometimes caused some problems. Didn't always work, but Relayer was quite a fascinating album to do, and of course I was very excited that the band were using my studio, and everyone seemed to be comfortable there. It was, of course, the home of the famous incident where we went home one day after recording Gates of Delirium, or quite a big chunk of it, and Eddie had gotten the tapes mixed up, and the one that we were supposed to keep he thought was the one we were throwing away, so he slashed through the whole reel and put it in the trash. And the next morning when we all got back to the studio, we said, no, it wasn't that version you were playing now, it was the other version. So he spent the rest of the day taking all the bits out of the trash and taping them all back together with sticky tape to reassemble the probably about 300 or 400 pieces of tape, which he did, to his credit, achieve. And I believe that's the master that ended up being on the album. So anyway, Yes finished Relayer, and we went off on tour and played that. And then I personally had been in Miami and went to the MCI factory, because at that time the exchange rate was great, and MCI had come out with a very good set of equipment. I believe John Anson also bought from them as well. And so I installed, I think it was about a 60-channel MCI desk and a 24-track machine. And then I had some Studer stereo machines, and basically it was the time when everything was quadraphonic, so the whole studio was set up to be quadraphonic. I don't think I ever ended up mixing anything in quadraphonic, but it looked good. And so with all this equipment duly installed, we set about to fish out of water. And so it was all a very exciting time for me, and which leads to side 2, and the slightly more jazz influence, you could say, or offbeat first track. Side 2, of course, only having 2 tracks, Lucky 7 being the first one, and Safe, Canon Song, was the second one, which developed into a large piece of music. The song itself only represents the first few minutes of the track, and the whole track is a good 14-15 minutes long from what I can remember, and develops into a whole orchestral canon piece. And once again, Andrew Jackman very responsible for the arrangement, and it turning out very well. However, before that, Lucky 7. Andrew Jackman on the Fender Rhodes, and of course Lucky 7 named after the fact that it is in 7/4. This track turned out a lot better than I had hoped for, so actually I'm playing my Fender Telecaster bass, which I had an extra pickup put on to make it like a Fender jazz bass, and it was white, and if anyone's seen it recently, I'd like it back because it got nicked from my studio quite a few years ago by somebody, and I did used to like that guitar a lot. However, it sounds good to this day.
The shadows of the fading light, nothing in sight, nothing in mind. Nothing gained when you're feeling restrained. The more you look, the more you'll find.
Of course, you're hearing the alto sax, I believe, of Mel Collins, where he also later plays a major solo towards the end. But and I will always remember when he came down to do this track, especially the solo, I think was his first take mainly, or his second take, but it was just so fluid, his playing, that he just pulled it off in a flash of brilliance.
Upon the sea we swiftly sail.
Once again, there's a nice blend of the textural violin parts in here with the saxophone.
The more we strive in the search for truth, love and honesty could be love.
Interesting thing about this story, Think You Could Be Lucky Tonight, was actually written about well, I had 2 kids at the time I did this, my 2 oldest girls, Carmen and Chandrika, and they were both little, and we had a nanny, and the lyric came to me one night when she was going out to the pub that maybe she'd be lucky tonight, because she wasn't very lucky in love, actually. Well, I don't know, maybe she was. I didn't keep her real concentrated. So if I may have been wrong about her whole mode of operation, but she was a very nice girl anyway. Just goes to show that everything that's written in Yes isn't cosmic. Her name was Margaret. She was a great nanny.
From the trees by the silvery sands to the ice of the golden midnight lands, runs a thread of the tears that are shed, the laughter on the other hand. Keeping up with the plans and the schemes, chasing dreams, hard to tell what it means, but I think we could be
Great drumming from Bill. And here is that Mel Collins solo. Yeah, Bill Bruford definitely had a great talent for building excitement on a backing track, which allowed Mel, I guess, to feel the vibe and solo off of the drums. A little bit of pizzicato strings there. Nice way of ending a track where it just seems to have things drop out and everything winds down and just ends in a kind of a chord of tranquility that starts the next song. Which was a difficult song to sing and make it sound good. I remember numerous takes of the opening vocal for it. And these were in the days before you could tune things. So you had to sing them. Trying to capture an almost an atmosphere of beauty, which is not an easy thing to do. But once again, Andrew built that in with the string arrangements.
When you say we let you down, who will mind? When your lover turns around, you will find joy in the morning.
Nice horn line there, and once again producing a very cinematic approach, very cinematic visual, I guess, to the music.
Beside you when you're walking down the street, looking
Now, a lot of this I think dodges about between various signatures. I think some of it's 11, 16. I think some of it's 13, 16. I think some of it's even 17, 16. You get a prize if you can name the bars that belong to which one. Of course, is the main instrumental theme, this little tune, which recurs throughout the remainder of the track. And this little solo here is actually on my white Rickenbacker 8-string bass, which I do still have. Beauties of being able to have natural string basses from the orchestra was that I was able to do solos with higher notes and still maintain some low end to the overall picture. And I'm particularly happy with the way the vocals turned out in this section here. Nice harmonies. I'll be waiting beside you to shelter your hearts like a ship in a Yeah, this is 11/4 section, I believe. Or maybe not. Yeah, there's once again a phaser or a flanger. I can't remember which one. It may have been the early Eventide flanger on the bass. And this bass actually, in this section, is my blue Gibson Thunderbird bass. Once again, the 12-string Rickenbacker makes a reappearance with the counterpoint melody here. Very distinctive sound, the Rickenbacker 12-string. Very clear cymbal bell sounds. Bill there. tempo change. In those days, kind of shifting in tempos was obviously a very natural thing. Yes, I'd used a lot of it, and I guess we used to regard that as a natural part of making music more than possibly people do today, but nice brass lines here. And Bill Bruford. Bill had such extraordinary talent for understanding weird bar lengths and time signatures that there was no problem for him to solo over them, and very confidently. I always call this the Siberian section. It reminds me of the salt mine picks and axes. And has that right feeling, well, that feeling of being somewhere very cold. And slightly, slight feel of misery, which isn't a bad thing because soon you come out into the sun. Getting a successful blending of all the themes and melodies all put together and building towards the final climax. Great chord changes, once again mainly attributable to Andrew's arranging skills and also his piano playing here coming up. Use of distances and horns, etc. There's a very interesting effect in the string basses here where they play very odd low harmonics. So I know Andrew was particularly proud of the fact that they actually pulled it off, but somewhere around here. And leading into the final joyful celebration. No prizes for guessing that was an edit. final bass solo. Once again on the Rickenbacker with the fuzz box. That final big drum that we hired in, we couldn't get it into the studio because it was this like 12-foot high thunder drum or something that we hired for the day, and played one note on it. And unexpectedly at the end, just dissolving into this quiet passage, which was played on my double neck Gibson. That was one of those SG type Gibsons with a 6-string neck and a bass neck, and just with the 6-string pickups on. You get the reverberation effect. So I was playing the neck with the 4 strings, and you're hearing it from the other neck pickups. Well, thanks very much. Good night.